So let me welcome everybody. My name is Bill Friedheim. I'm chair of the PSC Retirees chapter. We have a meeting today that's going to be in two parts. The first hour is going to be on the Cuny New Deal. The second hour is going to be on a topic that is probably on all of your minds, the proposed changes to retiree health care. I know there are a number of people attending this meeting who are not members of the PSC Retiree chapter. You're more than welcome. We're really happy to have you. But I just want to make clear that in terms of participation in the meeting, speaking, what have you, you should be a PSC retiree if you want to talk and participate in the meeting. You're welcome to contribute whatever you want to the chat. So without further ado, why don't we start the first part of the meeting, which is on the Cuny New Deal, which is a kind of bold legislative initiative that's been promoted by the PSC and by the Cuny Rising Alliance, and I'll talk about that alliance in another moment or two. To reimagine Cuny, particularly to reimagine Cuny after decades and decades of austerity funding. And maybe not just simply reimagine Cuny, but hark back to a Cuny that most of us knew. I mean, some of you are alumni of the City University. Of course, all of us either taught or were professional staff at the City University. When I started teaching in 1965, there was free tuition at Cuny. When I started teaching in 1965, there was an excellent ratio of counselors, mental academic counselors to students. When I started teaching in 1965, there was a much higher ratio of full-time faculty to students than there is now. Some of this I think we would like to go back to, but we also want to imagine a very different kind of Cuny. So we've invited two speakers today. Let me introduce them. They'll speak one after another. Then we'll entertain questions. Let me introduce Remy Salas, who is the new director of Cuny Rising, which is a coalition of Cuny student and labor organizations, I believe started, what, 4 or 5 years ago. It's a coalition that really reflects the multiracial face of the City University of New York. Remy is a PSC member. He's an adjunct lecturer in ethnic and race studies at BMCC. He's an author, a political strategist, a veteran of city government. Most important, he knows his way around New York State and the New York City political landscape. And Cuny Rising Alliance has played a really key role in formulating this New Deal for Cuny legislation, which hopefully most of you know about, but if not, you're going to find out rather shortly. The second speaker is going to be somebody who has actually spoken to our retiree chapter before on electoral issues. That's Luke Elliott Negri. Luke is the chair of the PSC Legislative Committee. He's helped coordinate the PSC's 2021 endorsement process and electoral work. He's also spent a lot of time, probably more time than he wanted to, lobbying in Albany and at City Hall around the budget for Cuny and pushing this New Deal for Cuny legislation. And as Luke will probably explain, we did much better this year in terms of the budget coming out of Albany than any time I can remember in the last 10 or 15 years. But there is still a long, long way to go. And Cuny is chronically underfunded. Luke is working at the School of Labor and Urban Studies attached to the Graduate Center, where he conducts research on worker organizing. He's published in a number of important journals, His forthcoming co-authored book project with Oxford University Press analyzes the conditions under which social movements can make substantial gains. So I'm really excited to have both of them as speakers. This will be the first hour of the program today, and as I say, at 2 o'clock, we're going to transition into the issues about the proposed move to Medicare Advantage. But Remy, why don't you go first, then Luke, and then we'll open it up for questions. And so Remy, you're on.
Thank you so much, Bill, and thank you everyone that's on the call and giving me an opportunity just to introduce myself. I am the Cuny Rising Alliance campaign director, as well as I am an adjunct professor at BMCC, as Bill indicated. So just an introduction on the Cuny Rising Alliance is a coalition of organizations and individuals who aim to improve Cuny and advocate for more funding for the public university system that educates hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers every year at a 4-year school or even a 2-year institution, as well as the Graduate Center. It's made out of more than 30 organizations, and my goal is to continue growing those numbers. One of the things is, my goal is every month just to bring in 3 to 5 more organizations that can help us on the ground to keep mobilizing and keep fighting for, everyone in Cuny, from the professors, from retirees, from the students, and even the staff, and trying to get more alumni to be more involved. My introduction is quite short, but I'm going to provide a link if you guys ever want to know more about the Cuny Rising Alliance. We have a petition on our website that you can all sign on. And if you ever need any information, you can always reach out to me, or I can also provide you the website to get more information on what are future events that we're doing, as well as things that you can bring your students to be able to mobilize for the future of Cuny. I'm going to segue this to Luke to speak more about the legislative work and the New Deal for Cuny. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Remy, and thanks everyone. Don't tell anyone else, but this is my favorite PSE chapter, so I'm glad to be talking with you all this afternoon. My thought is to speak for not too much longer than Remy did, and then to try to have some engagements with folks just about questions, and also thinking about you're a very mobilized and engaged chapter, and so just some thought about especially next cycle, what the role of PSC members from your chapter can be. So yeah, I guess I just want to, I'm just curious by show of hands, how many people know the basics of what's in the New Deal for Cuny bill? Do people know at all or not? Yeah. Some do, some don't. Yeah, I want to take a minute to run through what's in there. And then I'll just tell you, so I've been the PSC Cuny legislative representative for about 6 months. So I came in right as we were diving into this cycle. And so I just want to tell you a little bit about what our strategy was, and in my view, what worked and didn't work in the budget cycle, with an eye towards how we can improve our, our game, as it were, for next cycle. So that'll be what I'll do, and then we can have some engagement and have some conversations. So the bill, as Bill Friedheim said, is a little bit of a back to the future kind of bill. So it makes Cuny free, as it once was. And since I've been engaged in this work with more of my time, I've just thought a lot about the racial dimensions of what went on in the early 1970s, and how it was just very possible to do a free Cuny when it was for a majority white population. And then shortly after open admissions, all of a sudden it was too expensive. In my view, the fiscal crisis was just a decision not to raise taxes to fund the city operations, which again had been good enough good enough when it was a majority white city, not so much when it was a majority people of color city. So I think it's back to the future, but with the new New York. And I think we all want to go there. So a free CUNY 1, that's about access, but then the bill is also substantially about the quality of the education once you get there. And so the bill mandates ratios of full-time faculty, of mental health counselors, and of academic advisors to students based on national standards. So the bill would in effect compel CUNY to hire new full-time positions to ensure that students are getting the services that they need and deserved, as well as the course offerings and the size of the classrooms that they need and deserve. And then there's also a piece about adjunct parity in there. I should say there is language in the bill that I think threads the needle. It doesn't compel departments to hire from the existing adjunct pool specifically, but also suggests that that is the first place that they should look for new full-time hires. There's people in our bargaining unit who I will say are on both sides of this question, some saying that there should be automatic conversions and some saying that there should be no special consideration for existing adjuncts. So, so that piece is in there. And then there is also, there's also language about adjunct parity in terms of pay, which regardless of the ratios would create an incentive of CUNY management to hire full-time. And then finally, there's a capital piece as well, the buildings and the physical plant, as it were. In the New Deal for CUNY. So that's what's in there. That's the substance. And I will say that I wasn't in this role before we had this bill. So all I know is this, but I thought, having been a participant in past lobbying efforts, it created a different kind of environment to have a very concrete, specific and aspirational piece of legislation to organize around. The budget process, for those who've participated, can be quite murky. It's a massive multi-bill endeavor that involves lots of backroom deals and negotiations, and things fall off and you are trying to figure out why. And so running in parallel to that, to be able to pile on new co-sponsors to a bill, to have legislators publicly stating that they support this aspirational kind of back to the future vision for CUNY, I think was really helpful in the budget process, because it gave you sharp and concrete asks to make of legislators. So we had the bill introduced the first week in February in the Senate, and then we didn't get a bill number in the Assembly because of their own issues until much later that month. So we really didn't have it for that much of the cycle. As folks know, April 1st is kind of the deadline for the budget cycle, and under Governor Cuomo, at least, the legislature has stuck to that. And we piled on, I think, 57 or 58 co-sponsors in that amount of time that we had the bill. So there was a lot of momentum and support. And I want to say that there was also support outside of just the 5 boroughs. We had a number of Long Island and Westchester legislators sign on, as well as a new legislator from Rochester, another person from upstate. So we really aimed to have kind of regional support for CUNY. And I think it was, telling that we got that, even though there are folks who had not a single PSC member or a single CUNY student in their districts, they still saw the importance of building this institution and making it what it can and should be. I guess I'll just, let's see, how long have I been talking? I'll do like 4 or 5 more minutes, and then I want to get to the de-engagement part, which in my experience is always the more interesting part. So I guess I want to say that in my view, there is a new opening in New York politics. I mean, maybe this is too basic to say, and everyone in this room is very keyed into this. But in my read of what's gone on in the state since at least 1981, when the lines were drawn after the 1980 census, the deal has been that the Republicans control the state Senate and the Democrats control the Assembly, and the 3 men get in the room, the governor, the leader, and the speaker, and cut deals. And those deals are really never that great for us because, one of the players in the room has no interest in them being that great for us. And depending on the year, maybe no one in the room does. So that's been the historic deal. And as folks probably know, in 2018, the terrain shifted when the Independent Democratic Conference was essentially vanquished. So again, I'm probably repeating things that most people know, but there was a group of Democratic legislators that for nearly a decade caucused with Republicans and maintained that kind of compact that went back to the way that the lines were drawn. And so 2019 was the very first legislative cycle on this new terrain. And in my view, the very important and big thing that that cycle that happened was rent laws. If you read the real estate organs, they say that the rent laws that passed in 2019 cost them billions and billions of dollars. And what that means for working people is fewer evictions and greater rights in dealing with their landlords. So that was a really substantial achievement that went beyond what the tenant movement, I think, had been aspiring to in recent years, because the terrain had been so difficult to operate on. And I looked at that success and studied it closely and talked to a lot of people who were involved in that and thought, geez, this is like a pretty good model for us to follow. We were keyed up to do some good organizing last year, but it got wiped away by COVID. I mean, no one really got much of anything in the last cycle. And then this cycle, we went in with what I think was a pretty good organizing strategy. I feel that having this bill, and that, in my little weird mind, legislative chambers are just like anything else. It's just a bunch of people who need to be organized to do the thing that you want them to do. It's no different than organizing in a workplace or anywhere else, especially when you've got super majority control of both of those chambers, right? And so the big insight in my mind from 2019 was that, essentially the legislature decided that, right? There was not this three-way negotiation, but there was enough organizing and pressure inside of the chambers that the deal was really between the leader and the speaker. And that we had the prospects of creating something like that, or at least acting as if that was possible this cycle, and really organizing deeply in the chambers and creating the conditions under which the leader and the speaker would agree to send some new money to Cuny. And, the outcome was, I will say, on the one hand, far short of what I had hoped for. And then on the other hand, we got better results than we have had of late in Albany. And so the main outcome that we got was an increase to the top TAP allocation, tuition assistance program allocation, that made a substantial kind of leap towards closing what we've called the TAP gap in the past. And really what that means in raw terms, it's a model, a projection, because you don't know about TAP until the students actually get there, but about 25 or 26 $1 million in new operating dollars for Cuny every single year going forward. That really is what that is worth. And then a number of other legislative wins that included a hold harmless provision that, depending on what costing person you talk to, is worth, $6, $7, or $8 or $9 million for the community colleges. And then a few other line items for Cuny in there. So by my rough calculation, about $40 million in new operating money. And then, by the way, absolutely no cuts, right? So the governor had proposed cuts, and all of those cuts were reversed. What we've seen in past years is a bunch of the cuts restored, some of them not, and then maybe some other little new bits and pieces. And what we got this cycle was a clean rejection of all proposed cuts, and then new operating money on top of that. And that is to me, that's good. Again, not all that I was hoping for and that many of us were hoping for, but no cuts plus new operating money is a substantial achievement in my view. The federal money that came in my experience in the negotiations in Albany, kind of cut both ways. So there's this massive influx of, nearly $833 million, basically nearly $1 billion in relatively unrestricted institutional funding for Cuny from the federal government. And that kind of affected the negotiations in Albany, because a lot of people were saying, geez, Cuny's getting $1 billion. Why are we going to go do more than what we're doing here? We're already rejecting all these cuts, putting in some new money. So in any case, I think the net of all of this is that Cuny has a lot of money. I would say has more cash on hand than it's had in recent years. There's new operating money in from the state. There are no cuts. And then there's this gobs of federal money coming in. I did my 5 minutes. I can say a little bit more about what I think we did really well. We had some really strong online mobilization and social media mobilization. I think we did really good organizing in what I think of as the outside of the inside in terms of the actual legislature. So we had a lot of legislative supporters, but didn't get as far in as I hoped into the actual inside negotiations and conversations in the legislature. And then street mobilization, partly this is COVID, but I would like to have seen thousands and thousands in the streets. And I think what we saw was hundreds in the streets. And I really, and this is something that we'll work on with Remy and the Cuny Rising Coalition, but I really want to see us next year have thousands of people in the streets, not just PSC members, right? Not just Cuny students, but also just broad community supporters who want to see this institution well-funded and all that it could and should be. So there's more to say about, we worked in a revenue coalition. There were new taxes this year. I mean, I could go on endlessly, but that would be too boring for everyone. So I think I'll stop there and would love to, and I know Remy would too, just engage with folks around questions, comments, criticisms. I've heard those before too, can handle them. So I would just happy to be here with you all with, don't tell anyone but my favorite chapter at the PSC, and love to talk more.
Okay, everybody sees that on the bottom of the screen, it says reactions. And if you click that one at the very bottom, it says raise your hand. If you have a question or you want to make a comment, raise your hand and we'll call on you. Let me.
I see Erwin Yellowitz has a
Yep.
question.
Yep. Erwin, go ahead.
Thank you, Luke, for the presentation. Thank you, Remy. The money coming into CUNY is one thing, free tuition is another. And I would like you to comment about the free tuition component. As you know, the State University has had tuition way back. And one of the reasons that free tuition ended for CUNY was that the State University had a tuition system, and therefore the Republicans in the state legislature saw no reason in a fiscal crisis to maintain free tuition in CUNY, which was a historical remnant of history. The question that is, how do you break this connection? Because SUNY still has tuition, as far as I know, will continue to have tuition, and you're proposing that CUNY not have it. How do you break that historic connection between SUNY and CUNY on the tuition question?
I mean, it's a really great question. One could say, geez, that's not going to happen and not possible. I guess I will say I did a bunch with UUP this cycle with the faculty and staff union of the SUNY system. And I think we even at the end of the cycle, we did this joint action where we got 1,200 PSC and UUP members and some students on a big Zoom call and made a heap of phone calls into the leader in the speaker's office, near the end of the cycle. So we did have some coordination with them that I thought was really fruitful. And I've engaged a bunch with their political director. And one thing that I've come to in our conversations is that these are just like, on the one hand, we have places where we can find alignment, where there is kind of similarity or parity between CUNY and SUNY. And then on the other hand, there are just very different institutional needs in terms of where the funding needs to go. So as I'm sure you know, SUNY has this hospital system that UUP represents a bunch of members at, and that's a whole set of state funding needs that are not at all analogous to the CUNY system. So I think, on the strategic side, I'm really wanting to work to find alignment with UUP about how we move stuff in Albany. And then in the really kind of practical legislative side, I think we need to have conversations with legislators that indicate our alignment with UUP, where it exists, and also our mutual recognition that these are two different institutions with different funding needs, different histories. And so I think we just need to make the case to the legislature that, that there's just a specific need at CUNY given the history at CUNY and everything else. That may not be a fully satisfying answer, Erwin, but I think it's the beginning of one. So I hear you, that is a real barrier. I guess I really feel like, even I would say, as we saw the Speaker Hasty, some of the comments that he made in these final negotiations, it was clear that he had read that op-ed in Gotham Gazette by Giovanni Picant about the racial history, or the racism, I would say, of the decision to charge tuition at CUNY. And so I just think there is a real way that deep history of free tuition at CUNY lives in the minds of actually existing legislators today. Dick Godfrey, a whole bunch of people will talk about their experiences with free CUNY or their parents' experience. So I just think we can draw on that, and then we just need the political power to do it. At the end of the day, you need the political power to execute a decision, right? And anything worth $1 billion is going to take a little oomph behind it, and it's going to be hard. I'll stop there.
I see Nancy Romer's hand up, but before we do that, just since you're on the issue of free tuition, to what extent do you think that this period is different? I mean, particularly given that the president is pushing a plan for free tuition at community colleges. Is it a really different period? Is there more possibility today than there was previously? I mean, what do you think? I mean, either Luke or Remy or both of you?
I mean, well, and just going into, so I go into, just to go piggybacking on what Luke mentioned earlier in terms of, I think that legislators are seeing, they see that providing free tuition institutions can help with the human capital and possibly the economy later on, and helping everyone grow. That's one thing. And also previously working in the Biden administration, I think it's in the campaign. I think it's a new time. I think it's people are seeing how this can benefit many people. And many of the people that have been affected by student loans and student loan debt have been speaking out in terms of how this has been a burden to them. So I think this is a new time and a new administration that is taking a deeper dive in terms of how we can move the needle forward, as well as Senator Bernie Sanders has put in a new legislative bill in terms of trying to navigate that argument as well. So having multiple electeds on the national stage talking about it, I think that this is a good time to fight for it and move the needle forward. Luke, do you want to say anything?
I think that's really true. I think the climate in DC, I mean, I am blown away by the Joe Biden that we are seeing in Washington, DC right now. Like honestly, this is not what I expected. Like, I'm not saying it's perfect at all, but it's like, holy crow. Like, it does make me feel like we're in a new era. If this is how he is acting as an executive, it's like the terrain has shifted so drastically. So I think we're just, I keep thinking, like, what is the breakdown of neoliberalism, which everyone still loves to throw around the term, but what does that look like? I feel like we're watching it happen, and it's hard to think in new terms as they're emerging. Like, so, this is not a neoliberal administration. I'm not saying I am totally identified with it, but it is something different, right? It's just a different moment at so many levels. And so maybe one of the conclusions we should draw from that is like, maybe we should be talking about a free SUNY. I mean, maybe instead of saying there's different institutions, maybe we should be saying this is the trajectory of the whole society is towards free higher education, and not that we should be cutting SUNY out of that equation. I don't know.
So I see Nancy Romer has her hand up and Elizabeth Starcevic. So Nancy first.
And I just want to jump in before Nancy starts, because a couple of people are in the chat who can't find the icon. So after Elizabeth, Yafa Schlesinger.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Remy and Luke. Very encouraging. And I agree. I think we're in a new era, and I think we should push really hard. You know, when you get an opening, that's the time to push. If you're too gentle in that push, you lose the opportunity. So I think we should do that. So I applaud your efforts. A couple of thoughts though. One is I know, Luke, you're working on getting more PSCers involved in their council districts, their assembly districts, their state senate districts, so that we have teams of people who are at the ready to move forward. And, you know, I hope that becomes as robust as possible. So, you know, I'm saying, I hope this is the idea that, let's say I'm in an assembly district. I would, and I agree to be sort of the team captain of that district, then I would have, you know, maybe 10 or 20 or 50 PSC members in that district. I would be in touch with them when the PSC has something that we want to advance in the assembly, so that there's a structure already going, so we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. I think that makes an enormous difference in terms of both efficiency and effectiveness. So, and it's a great role for retirees to play, right? We know our in-service colleagues are very busy with a million things, working, raising kids, all of that. It would be great if we could take a bigger role in those kinds of assignments. So that's one thing. And then one other thing I wanted to, well, two other things. One other thing was that, we ask a lot of people in New York State to support our movement, Cuny Rising, which is wonderful. I would like to also imagine that we would be part of other movements, the housing movement, the essential workers, the climate movement, the public schools, all of these other groups where we already have activists. PSC members are activists in all of these other movements. We just don't know who they are. It would be great to find out who are these activists, PSC members in other movements, and try to do more of an exchange. We've done this in the environmental movement. And I think it's a model to consider, because we want to engage as many of our members as we can, and as many of the other social movements, to see that Cuny is a civil rights engine in New York State. And I guess, and then the last thing is, how can we trace the money that should be coming to New York City and to Cuny from state budgets and from the federal legislation that's coming down, both the COVID legislation, the American Recovery Act, but also that will be coming down from the infrastructure bills or Thrive.
Yeah, I'll just say very briefly on the first piece, I'm in total agreement, Nancy. I mean, I think my vision for this work, and it's interesting to think about how this would ultimately line up with the work that you're doing in Cuny Rising, Remy. But in my mind, I would like to have a spreadsheet of every assembly district and of every Senate district and of every city council district, have a PSC member who is assigned as the district lead in each of those districts, right? And that each of those people manages the list of PSC members who also live in that district and can engage directly with those folks, and also manages the relationship with the district office, with the elected official from that district. And then if we want to move a sign-on letter, we should be able to send out an email to our district leads in the membership. They should be able to reach out to the legislator, and we should know in 24 or 48 hours who's our friends on this and who are not, right? Right now, the setup is that, a relative handful of us, it's a bigger handful than it was before, thanks to some work that Mike and Andrea did over the last couple of years and bringing, people more formally into the central work. But it's I don't have the capacity to make 200 phone calls on a dime to every legislator in the state. It's not going to happen, right? And we don't have that internally. But I think if we find a structure in which we can create kind of discrete roles for our members, as Nancy said, then I think our capacity expands substantially. And then, and this is where I think it's interesting to think about how this might fit with Cuny Rising work. But I think also if we can build lists of alums and of students that are by district, then we could actually have a kind of coalition district level, team that could, this is the other piece, when the legislator says no, we remind them that we've got constituents in their district and we're not happy about that, right? So that's the other piece of the puzzle, is actually being able to leverage our organization in the district to move the elected officials, not just to have little fun relationships with them. So totally on that. I agree also, Nancy. I mean, I think there is a capacity issue with engaging other movements. And I think to the extent that we can create roles and responsibilities where we're trusting members to represent our organization in those spaces and to report back, then I think we have the capacity to engage in more movement spaces. We did a bunch with the Revenue Coalition, but that has a more immediate self-interest, right, to the union in a sense. But I think you're also talking about stepping out a little bit beyond that and thinking just more about being active in these other movements. And so I think there is a similar issue there of trusting members to have roles and responsibilities that enable that work to happen more systematically. As far as tracing money, I mean, I know that there are some who are really excited about doing that. In fact, Bettina, who's our legislative director, the top person on the staff side, not on the elected side, really, she has a history of, tracing money and is kind of excited about this project. The deeper I've gotten into Albany, the more I'm like, I don't know, probably half these people should be indicted. And this is a crazy state where I mean, $1 billion comes and goes and no one knows where it went. I mean, I don't want to say I'm pessimistic, but I'm pessimistic because I just think there's, I think there is a lot of literal and figurative corruption going on. And so I don't know. I mean, it is a project that we should take on seriously, but there is also a lot of money sloshing around and not a ton of transparency around it. So I don't know. I think it's an important thing. And I will just confess my own confusion about how best to approach that. But thankfully, we have a very talented, qualified staff person at the PSC who I think has interest in doing that effectively.
So you only think half of them should be indicted? Well,
And I won't say which half because they're all my friends. But I mean, I don't know. I was amazed. Anyways, it's crazy. I mean, this is a state with a $200 billion budget, so a lot of money just sloshes around. A lot of money sloshes around. And that's another thing to say about our bill, by the way. $1 billion sounds like so much money. I mean, I just watching this process closely. You know, $500 million comes and goes pretty quickly in this process. It poof, there it is all of a sudden. So, you know, we shouldn't think that $1 billion is so much money. We should think that $1 billion is the kind of money that sloshes in Albany, and we should go get a piece of it.
So Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yes, I want to thank all of you for your thoughtfulness and for your activity. And also, Nancy, I think it's wonderful to see the representation of how society ought to be, meaning that people who are in climate are also concerned about housing, are also concerned about CUNY, because after all, what we've seen during the COVID is how much our students were impacted in all of those areas where housing, jobs, climate, and the ability to function as students became the last important thing that they could think about. So it's partially hearing your vision of a society that we have experienced, as Bill was talking about earlier. We have experienced that to a degree, and we want to both bring it back and also renew it in a better way. But the other thing is, I too want to ask about the money. It has been a long time already within the short times of budget that the Chancellor, Felix Perez Matos, has gotten money from the government. Nobody knows, like the song says, nobody knows where that money is. Every time we're asked to sign a petition, the Centro, right, where he was involved particularly for Puerto Rican studies, he's not giving them money. So what is happening to the money that we already know exists within our purview? And how is it possible to access information within that? And the other thing is, which is also stuff that you've all brought up, which is it seems to me that frequently at meetings, it has come to our retiree attention that we really don't know all the retirees from each campus. And I'm not sure how you get to access that information, but somehow that expanding of our cohort would also be probably a useful thing. So thank you all.
So Luke or Remy, you want to respond, or should we just?
I don't know if you want to add anything, Remy. I would just say that I think, I don't know if you participated in or saw Elizabeth, the Free the Funds rally, but I think my view is that we should be empowering chapters on the campus to just demand the things that they need and to lay claim to that money. I think on the one hand, there's the technical question of like, where is it? But then there's also the political question of saying, I don't care which bank account it's in, it's there. We have needs on the campuses. And I feel like department chairs should be saying, that line that got frozen last year, we need to fill that line. That adjunct that got laid off, we need to rehire that adjunct. And we should be creating bottom-up pressure to spend the money as we see fit. You know,
if you say that's supposed to come from the department chairs, then that's an organizing phenomenon in itself.
Sure. Yeah. I think, so I just think bottom-up pressure to spend the money is key. You know, we know from talking, so there is some oversight, right? Like the higher ed chairs can, you know, call into CUNY and say, what's up with this, that, and the other thing. And I think we know from the hearings earlier this year that they still hadn't spent like $50 or $60 million in the CARES Act money. Forget the new $1 billion coming their way that's relatively unrestricted. They're just sitting on the money while laying off a bunch of adjuncts, for example, or freezing hires. So so anyway, I think there are some technical mechanisms as well, but I just feel like there's cash on hand and we know that, and then it's just pressure to spend that money, based on what our priorities are is the most effective.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so Yafa,
Actually, Yafa doesn't have a question. She has it for later. So who I have in the queue is James, Glenn, and Tom.
yeah,
and
James
Rob.
Davis is the newly elected president of the PSC. He's going to take office on
Hello.
May 25th. And welcome to this retirees meeting, James. And I know you were at our last meeting when we also discussed the proposed moves by the city to Medicare Advantage. So James, on the Cuny New Deal, you have a question or comment or statement?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thanks, Bill. I appreciate being able to drop in, and I did want to come today because I know that the conversation about the MLC proposal is continuing. I wanted to be present to hear the discussion about that. It's a huge challenge, and you all have, helped to raise that. But I was glad when I popped into the room to hear the conversation that Remy and Luke had started. And the only thing that I just felt moved to follow up on, on something that Luke was describing, and I mean he followed up and picked up on it in his last remark. But I do feel, Nancy, following up on your question about creating some transparency around the funding, that this is a great organizing project on the campuses. I mean, we of course centrally can try to exert as much pressure as possible on the chancellor to to demonstrate use of the funds, but really, I mean, the scandal to me at the moment is the fact that the university seems to be arrogating to itself the federal pandemic relief funds that were allocated by campus, and they were allocated by campus for a reason. There's a reason why the Burr Manhattan Community College is supposed to receive $108 million in institutional aid, and Brooklyn College, my campus, is scheduled to receive $58 million, and it has to do with the number of Pell Grant recipients on each campus. So, one of the sort of fiascos I feel right now is just that the university is attempting, for the moment, it seems, to consolidate that as if, because they are the administrative coordinator of the funds, that they can also make elective decisions about allocation. And so conversation that chapter chairs have been having is, and Bill, you've been involved in some of these meetings, is how to, as Luke put it, exert local level, chapter level pressure on the president, so that it's not simply a question of exerting political pressure on the chancellor or the chancellery, but to also say, look, on my campus, I can see from the schedule, CARES, the CRISA Act, the American Rescue Plan, I can see that adds up to, this chunk of funds in direct student aid to Brooklyn College students. It adds up to this much in maximum in institutional aid. And they need to be aggressive, right, in pursuing that and trying to go get it. So there's a real kind of public education component to this, I think, within our membership, but it's also an excellent organizing opportunity. It is, I don't think that we should expect transparency, but I think, but I think we should demand it. And it's a good place to make the local presidents feel some accountability and some heat to pursue funding, and not just continue in the mindset of managing the austerity, because that's really still where they are. They're in the mindset of just managing people's expectations. Their first move is not to say, what would you all do with $58 million new dollars if you could figure out how to spend it? Their first line is to say, we can't possibly do all the things you guys want to do with this, right? That's point A, B, and C. And so we have to keep pushing there. So again, thanks for the chance to be here and talk with you today.
All right, well, I'm going to suggest that we hear from three more people. Is it just three have their hands up now? And
Yeah, it's Glenn.
Tom Angotti, and Ron Spalter. Why don't we have each of them ask a question or make a comment and then we'll have Luke and Remy respond, and then we'll move on to the second half of the meeting. So who did I say was first? Glenn.
Glenn.
Hi. I'm a delegate to the PSC Delegate Assembly, and I'm sure Luke knows that there's a minority view in the Assembly that says that we've kind of oversold the legislative action and that we won't achieve what we want to achieve just by that. That it's going to require more militant action, possibly even a strike. But, this year we were told that, for years we've been told every year that we're going to get some kind of transformative budget. Transformative is a big word that we use. And this year was the best possible year because there was all this federal money. There was no budget gap. Cuomo was weakened. There was a super majority. So even if he vetoed it, it could be overcome. And what was the result? I posted in the chat the fiscal year 2022 state enacted and city preliminary budget analysis, which is on the Cuny website. And, there's a chart. It shows very clearly the senior colleges are getting an increase of 1%. 1% is less than the rate of inflation. The community colleges are getting 0%. De Blasio's proposing a cut. So, nothing transformative there. And it's very unlikely that they're ever going to pass the New Deal for Cuny without having, major tax cuts on the wealthy, which the wealthy oppose, and they have a tremendous amount of influence. The day that the Citizens Budget Committee or the Partnership for New York, which are, very influential organizations, the day that they support the New Deal for Cuny is the day I'll believe that it might happen. So, I know, this sounds very cynical, but I just think at some point we have to confront the fact that legislative action has not worked over the last 20 or so years. And I see no reason why it will in the future. Sorry.
Nothing to be sorry about. Tom and Gotti?
Yeah. A question. What I see in the campuses where I've taught, Hunter and the Graduate Center, is the continuation of a neoliberal hegemony when it comes to university policy. There's a lot of private fundraising going on in the colleges. And when you're talking about increasing the public budget, it runs smack into the practice over the last 20, 30 years in the elite institutions. And let's talk about the contradictions within Cuny. Not all Cuny campuses are equal. So Hunter College is a big fundraiser, the president there. I wonder whether Matos Rodriguez has the neoliberal fixation in his mind as he's coming into office. Anyway, so the question is this something that ought to be part of the discussion for us and for the legislature?
And then looking at hold on one second.
Ron, do you still have a question?
I guess not. Ron no longer has his hand
Yeah,
up.
he put his hand down. Okay.
So if you want to respond to Tom's question, to Glenn's cynicism about the legislative process, and to James's comments about organizing, on the campus, go for it. Either Luke or Remy or both of you.
Yeah, do you want to go ahead, Remy? Maybe we should each respond, and then that can be our final comments, right, Bill?
Well, Ron actually has his hand back
Okay,
up.
Ron has his hand back up.
Let's get to Ron's question.
Right.
And
Go
then
ahead.
you can
And
do
then you
that.
can respond to one more question.
Sorry, thanks, Luke.
Go ahead, Ron.
And Remy. You're muted.
You're muted, Ron. Yeah. You're still muted.
All good
Uh,
now. Just
uh,
some points of fact, just so people, if they're looking for solutions, can be aware of a few things. First, while the 22 million the tap gap, to remind people, is the difference between what we raise tuition by, or where the Higher Education Services Corporation set the max for TAP. When they increased that by $500, they did it for the privates as well. Pretty large giveaway to private universities in the state of New York. They couldn't just do it for CUNY; they had to do it for all public, all institutions of education. And second of all, while my colleagues are looking for the checkbooks where the university has parked all these hundreds of millions of dollars, please remember that most of these rules, most of the federal requirements, federal legislation that was passed to provide this money, they're following FEMA rules, meaning it's reimbursable. CUNY doesn't get $1 billion. CUNY will, if it spends $1 billion in accordance with the federal practices, will be reimbursed. So don't spend a lot of time looking for the bank account where Matos Rodriguez is keeping the money. He doesn't really have it. And thirdly, I guess as everybody in the organization knows at this point, CUNY can't spend $1 without the second floor in Albany approving it. And there is yet no statewide plan for the release of the capabilities that those dollars would provide and pre-financing of that money, waiting for FEMA to reimburse, waiting for the feds via FEMA rules to reimburse it to the university. So if we want to focus on something, I would encourage us to focus on the needs and get a clear list, campus by campus, as to what the needs are. So when the university makes up a shopping list as to how, again, in accordance with the rules established by the legislation, CUNY will pre-finance the expenditures and wait for the feds to reimburse them. I just didn't want people running around looking for where the money is hidden, because there is no cash. Thank you, Bill.
So if you want to respond to Ron's comment, to Tom's question, and Glenn's cynicism about the legislative process, not necessarily in that order, and then that'll be a wrap. So Luke or Remy, who wants to speak to this?
So I just, I'm gonna just respond more in terms of, I know that Glenn mentioned that, but I have faith. I have faith that we can make something happen in terms of, I know that there's a lot of things against us legislatively, but I think this is a new age. And I think that if we put more pressure on Speaker Hasty, as well as the Speaker in the Senate, we can push something forward. So this year, it's something that something I'm trying to mobilize with different electeds in the state of New York. And I'm trying to work with everyone that's involved with CUNY. I think that it's something that many people, the majority of people in New York has a relationship with CUNY, that we can sell this. And with the new government, the new presidential, with Biden coming in, I think there's something we can manage. I know that in the past it's been tough, but this year we've seen some wins, and I think we can continue that. And I think that I see there's a light under the tunnel, and I think that we can keep going. I know there's a lot of things against us, but I think that working with your chapter, working with the students, alumni, I think that we can make something happen, and working on strategies, me and Luke, as well as everybody in our team, to move things forward. So maybe perhaps in the future we could come back and give you some more strategic efforts, but I just want you to keep the faith so we can move this forward.
Thanks, Remy, and you'll certainly be welcome back for a follow-up. But Luke, go ahead.
Yeah, great. I agree, Remy. To Tom, I'm not sure if I got my notes on what you had to say, but I guess I think I agree with you. I think there is some neoliberal hegemony, and ideology has a way of surviving past shifts in the kind of underlying economic structure, and I think we need to do some active work to break that open and to create a different mindset. So I think I agree there. Ron, your comments were really helpful, and I think especially you're focusing in, I mean, a bunch of what you said made a lot of sense to me, but I think there's a whole strategic question of this decision to focus on TAP And I think the New Deal for Cuny legislation represents a break with that. I have political issues with TAP for precisely the reasons that you said. I mean, on the one hand, it's going to be really difficult to claw back that $500. It's actually easier to cut Cuny than to cut TAP, right? So actually that win is probably more permanent than many wins that we could get. On the other hand, it is partly that way precisely because it subsidizes the privates, because there is kind of unity of lobbying interests across. And I do think that going forward, I think we should take the risk of stepping away from that and just actively looking for direct funding to Cuny around tuition and around our needs. But that involves real trade-offs. And so anyway, I really appreciate you raising that. And I think it's worth all of us in this organization contemplating what those trade-offs are, whatever direction we head in. And then Glenn, I mean, I have to say, I actually like 98 or 9% agree with what you just said. Like, honestly, I do. I think that like being clever about, the weeds of Albany is not the way that you get $1.5 billion. But I do think that's a piece of it. Ultimately, we need outside power. And I agree, maybe that comes from a successful organizing project to get the organization strike ready. Maybe it comes from getting 5,000 or 10,000 people in the street disruptively. I don't know exactly what the formula is, but I do agree. I mean, I wouldn't want anyone to leave this meeting with, me saying, look, all we need to do is lobby effectively, and that's how you get $1.5 billion. I think that we do need strong, powerful, disciplined, organized outside pressure. I just think we need to build that, and absolutely. And I think, the details of Albany are just a piece of the puzzle, and perhaps the smaller piece. So maybe I'll surprise the room by saying I basically agree with Glenn. Although I'm just not cynical about the ability to win. That's the one thing where I disagree. I think we can actually win. I mean, maybe I'm nuts, but like, even just looking at some of Joe Biden's behavior, I'm like, this is crazy. This guy's just cutting checks all over the society. I mean, so who knows? History is weird. It's contingent. I don't think you can predict things, based on the past. And I think we need to give it our all, militantly, cleverly in terms of lobbying and everything else at kind of changing the terrain and at winning on the terrain. So I'll stop there. Thanks, everyone. Bill, you're muted. The whole time you've been muted.
Yeah, I think people like it better when I'm muted. So sorry, I'm unmuted. Yeah, right. You shouldn't have stopped me. You just should have let me go on and on and on, and then we could go to the next part of the meeting. But what I started to say on that optimistic note, let's conclude this segment. I mean, as I started to say when I was muted, this conversation will continue and continue and continue. We'll have Luke and Remy back. We're going to be seeing a lot of James Davis, who asked one of the questions, who is just elected the new president of the PSC. And congratulations, James. And James and the other new officers will be assuming office on, I believe, May 25th. And the issue that Luke raised, and that we've all been struggling with for years and years, will continue and will be on James's plate. How do we achieve power to do these kinds of things that we want to do? So again, many, many thanks. And we're going to move on to the second part of the meeting. But before we do that, I just want to alert you to two events that are upcoming. One, on June 2nd, we're going to do an event around an exhibition at the new museum, which I actually went and saw in person this weekend. Grief and Grievance, Art and Mourning in America, an intergenerational exhibition of works from 37 artists. We're going to be sending out an email blast in another week, inviting people to sign up for a free interactive virtual tour of Grief and Grievance, to be followed, that's at 1 o'clock, to be followed at 2 o'clock on June 2nd, with a Zoom meeting that we'll set up, where we're going to have one of the people who helped curate this, Maya Harakawa, who is a student at the Graduate Center, lead us in a discussion of what we saw. This is a powerful multimedia exhibition. And the person who first called it to our attention was Marcia Newfield. And Marcia has been helping to organize this. Marcia or Cecilia McCall, either one of you, have a word to say about this? And if I don't hear from either one of you, or Marcia?
You have to let, okay,
There
so
you
what you neglected to say, Bill, that this morning in America is a response by African American communities
Yep.
to the theme of mourning, where the principle is not just COVID mourning, but that mourning has been a constant theme in the Black American response or mindset. It's been a necessary theme. So this very famous curator got it together, but then he died, so it was continued in his honor. And there are 37 or 39 artists from all over the country. It's quite a stunning, it takes up the whole museum, which is 3 floors, and it's ending June 6th.
Right.
So this is the last virtual tour that the museum is holding. There's another one in May, but we've signed, I mean, and you can go to that, but go on their website, sign up for the virtual tour run by the museum, and then we'll have our own conversation after that. And if you have the legs and the masks and the will, go down there. If you live in New York, it's on the Bowery, all the way down near Prince, etc. It's very easy to access. You can walk in. I don't think you have to have a time reservation to just enter. It's open a few days a week and late on Thursday night. So if you're up for that, go see it in person.
Yeah, call in first, I would suggest. I mean, this weekend you had to have a timed reservation. When I went on Saturday, I don't know if that's true during weekdays, but it's a block and a half below Houston Street on the Bowery. And of course, I omitted a very important detail here. I mean, these are Black artists, who are exhibiting multimedia, but we'll have something in an email blast about it for anybody who wants to join us on June 2nd.
Bill, did you go in person?
Oh, I went in person, absolutely.
Oh, great.
I mean, it's.
Hey, this is Cecilia. I also went in person. I actually got on the subway for the first time in a year and went to see it since we are going to be having the virtual tour. I thought I needed to see it in person. It's an easy exhibit to access. The museum is not a big museum. It's a small museum. So you can get around very easily there. But, in addition to the mourning aspect, the impetus for this was when Trump went to Gettysburg to have that speech, that he had a speech at Gettysburg, which was the battle that turned the Civil War. And that is a site of grieving. But it also mentions the fact that it's a site of grievance on the part of the Confederacy.
Yeah, I mean, basically it's an exhibit about Black grief and white grievance, given concerns about losing dominance in American society. It is a very powerful exhibit. Anyway, we'll send out more about it in an email blast with all the details. And meanwhile, if you want to find out more about it, just Google New Museum and go to their website, and I think you'll be impressed. And then just one other quick, and this is really a segue to the next part. On May 19th, there's going to be a forum on the New York Health Act, which is definitely related to the issues that are before us in the next hour. And Jim Pearlstein, can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, I see that there are 193 people on the call right now. And to steal from Samuel Johnson, who said this in another context, the prospect of one's execution in a fortnight concentrates the mind wonderfully. We're threatened with a shift of all public employee retirees from Medicare to a private profit-driven system called Medicare Advantage. And this would not be a threat. It would not be a problem if we had guaranteed universal health care in New York. If we had the New York Health Act as law, we wouldn't face this issue. Labor's role in achieving guaranteed universal health care in New York is a Zoom event coming up on Wednesday, May 19th from 7 to 9 p.m. And you can click on the link that Bill has provided to register for it. As you see on the screen, Gottfried Rivera and Gustavo Rivera and Richard Gottfried, who are the co-sponsors of the legislation, will be speaking, and you can see the other speakers there. It's clear we need healthcare reform. It's also clear that, well-informed as the CUNY community is, most CUNY folks don't know that there is such a thing as the New York Health Act, and that it would provide for all the care that the CUNY community needs. So this is really important. Labor's role in getting this passed is critical. We play an important part in that struggle. So please attend. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Jim, to the second part of the program today, and probably the reason that most of the 200 people on this call are on this Zoom. The proposal to move retirees' health care from traditional Medicare with secondary insurance from the city to Medicare Advantage. I'm just putting and I'll put this in the chat. For the documents that I'm about to show you, I would suggest that you go to the PSC retiree webpage, which is psc-cuny.org/retirees. Also, if you have questions about the proposed healthcare move, we're not going to answer them today. I mean, we had Donna Costa from the Welfare Fund at our meeting on April 5th. We had Barbara Bowen. I know people have been sending questions to me. I am not in a position to answer them. Plus, we don't know what the actual proposal is. But Donna is on the technical committee, that's looking at the proposals. And if you send your questions to communications@psccuny.org, Donna hopefully will respond to them. I mean, if you don't get a response immediately, also understand she's been overwhelmed with questions. But today's second half of the program is really to talk about action, what we can do to try to stop this. We had a resolution at our April 5th meeting calling for the MLC to institute a moratorium on these negotiations with the Office of Labor Relations of the City of New York. It passed overwhelmingly, something like 93% to 7%. I think, as most of you know, on April 15th at the PSC Delegate Assembly, and the Delegate Assembly is the highest governing body of the PSC, a resolution was passed unanimously, 115 to 0, supporting our call for a moratorium. So what I would like to do is, for this hour of the meeting, is one, I'm going to share my screen again in another moment or two, and lay out a list of possible actions that we can take. Then I'm going to open it up, not only for questions, but for people who have other ideas about possible actions. I mean, we want to hear your voices, we want to hear your ideas, and we want to mobilize to do something about this. in terms of the incredible concerns that you have and that I have. I mean, I'm just apoplectic about this, and I assume most other people are, in terms of the concerns that you have as things develop. And if God help us, there is eventually a proposal to move to Medicare Advantage. I mean, we will call a special meeting and we'll try to answer whatever questions come up. I mean, God help us if they institute this. I mean, the transition to Medicare Advantage would be an absolute logistic nightmare, particularly given, how the city of New York operates. So I'm going to
People, before you jump in, Bill, people are asking for the information you just gave about the website to post that in the chat. And I think people would like Jim to also post in the chat the information that he gave about the May 19th.
Yeah, because I'm tied up, sharing my
Yeah.
screen right now. I mean, I will eventually post that information, the link to the website.
Separately. We'll
Separately, shortly. I only have two.
Now you're muted. You're muted, Bill.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I said I only have two hands. As I age, like the rest of us, I slow down a little. So while I'm trying to share my screen, I can't post that information, right away to the chat, but I will. The link to the retiree website. And by the way, that link is in the newsletter, which hopefully all of you got. And actually, you're gonna have to bear with me for a minute. Let me just, here we go. Yeah, this is a little difficult for me to manipulate. I don't know why I'm having trouble bringing up a particular page that I created on the website. Bear with me for another moment. Samantha okay, is the website now on the?
Yeah.
Yep.
It is, okay, but unfortunately it's not the page that I want. So here we go. What we can do. So this is the page on the website. I'll give you the link to this too. Possible actions to preserve retiree health care. One, I don't know how many people have done this. Sign the petition. We've been working with the Council of Municipal Retiree Organizations, which is COMRO, to mobilize retirees. They have a petition which has now been signed by over 10,000 people as of today. Let me see if this link works here. Here we go. Since I already signed the petition, it says, William, 2 things that you can help to do today to help reach victory. And it's, well, you're seeing here, 10,228 people have signed. Go to the petition. If you haven't already signed it, sign it. And then it's going to ask you to help mobilize more people to sign the petition. One, it suggests that you give a donation. I think you can skip that. You don't have to give a donation to change. But 2, it gives you possibilities for sharing by email, or if you have a Facebook account, on Facebook or social media. It's really important to get this petition out. And now I've got to figure out, whoops, how to get back to the page that I was on. You're, again, gonna have to bear with me for a moment. Yeah, and once again, I'm going to try to share my screen. Obviously, this is not going as smoothly as I had hoped. So there again, on my screen is, you know, what we can do. No, actually, this is the retiree homepage. And is only part of the page. People help me out here. I mean,
Yeah, it looks like it's like chopped a little bit because you can see the gray column on the right, but on the left it's chopped a little bit, so you can't really read. You got to make it out.
Let me see if I could share it, Bill.
yeah, okay. If you can share it, Samantha, I would appreciate that. All right. Why don't you scroll down a little to the second thing, demonstrate. Why don't you zoom in a little if you could, Samantha, so that people are better able to read this. So it says demonstrate. Comro is exploring the possibility of a demonstration at City Hall, but only if it can draw lots of participants. Our chapter and other organizations in Comro are polling members to see if they're ready to participate. At any rate, there's a link here. I will provide a link to this page in a couple minutes, or maybe Samantha can provide a link to the page.
I got it.
In the chat. But we've set up a page where we're asking people to sign up if you agree to come in person, face to face, for a midday demonstration at City Hall Park sometime in the next, week or two. Would you be willing to do this? I fully understand that a lot of people are not willing to do this. They're not ready to travel by subway yet. Or because we're aging and have health issues, there's no way that we can make it down there. But I think a number of us, myself included, are ready to go down to City Hall Park if there's a demonstration. And what we want to find out is, can we get significant numbers? I mean, I would think hopefully at least 50 people from our own chapter to do that. If we get retirees to come, I think we'll be able to get another 50 in-service members. That is people who are our colleagues, the 30,000 or so who are currently working at Cuny, either as faculty or as professional staff. Since this change, this proposed change or move to Medicare Advantage would affect them, since I assume most of them are looking forward someday to retiring and enjoying the same kind of good health benefits that we enjoy right now. So there's a link here. We won't go to it right now, where you can indicate that, yes, you're in a position to go down and demonstrate. And I fully understand those who cannot do it, so I'm not trying to guilt trip you into this, but it would be very important if we could get a significant body of people to show up for a demonstration. And Eileen, you want to try? Eileen is the secretary of Comro, an officer of Comro, and you want to chime in a little bit about what's been happening at Comro with the petition and with a possible call to demonstrate?
Yeah, I would say in the Comro is the Council of Municipal Retiree Organizations. Some of them are regular unions in the sense like we are a retiree chapter of a union. Some are separate organizations that are not, they're sort of affiliated with their former unions, but they're not actually connected. They don't have power or voting power in that union as we do. And some are not unions, but they are associations of retirees separately. And we've been working and probably concentrating on this health issue at our last 2 meetings in March and April. In April, we ended up with 2 back-to-back meetings with also members from other unions and other retiree organizations like ARA and NYSARA and NYCARA that would have an interest in this. And in a sense, Comro is on this. Comro basically initiated the petition drive. And so we have them to thank for getting that in front of us. And I urge all of you to not only sign it if you have not already signed it, but also make sure that you get it out to your networks. And this proposal will be as damaging to in-service folks as to us in the long run. So don't hesitate to send it to your in-service colleagues. Comro is on the same place as some of the unions have already made the same decision that we have made. MEA is one of those associations that has agreed to back the moratorium and also to, circulate the petition among its members. For most of the other members of Comro, which are the other retiree, unions and employee organizations, they're in the process of doing just that. They're circulating the petition, and they're also waiting for their executive committee and or their traditional membership meeting to officially sign on as organizations. And we will be, Comro will again be meeting the second Wednesday of May, and we will be doing more of this same kind of organizing around trying to stop the push to sign up for Medicare Advantage. I noticed, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, the petition is very important. And you might say, well, petitions can only do so much. It's actually gotten the attention of municipal labor leaders. I mean, for the first time, some of them are responding to their members because people have raised this issue. How come we don't know about this? I had dinner last night with a friend who's a union plumber, retired union plumber who worked at the New York Housing Authority. And when I told him that the city was considering a proposal to move to Medicare Advantage, he said, what? He knew nothing about it. I mean, what we've got to do is shine, present some sunshine on this so that more and more retirees know about it. And I think it'll give a certain hesitation. I'm not being, overly optimistic here to the MLC. And by the way, the MLC steering committee is meeting today. I don't think they're going to make a decision today, but they're meeting today. And once I find out from Barbara Bowen what happened, I mean, I will communicate that to the chapter. So the petition, the possibility of a demonstration, and demonstration I think is really important. I mean, those of you who can do it, should sign up so that we can go to that meeting of Comro in the second week of May and say we've got 50 or 100 or 150 people who are ready to show up face to face for a demonstration at City Hall Park. Call into the Brian Lair Show. People have already done that. Somebody did it this week. It's a little tricky. I mean, the mayor is, there's an Ask the Mayor segment, I think at 11 o'clock every Friday. We have the number here to call in. Obviously, if a lot of people call in, we're lucky if we get one person, but it gets the attention of the mayor, and it's important. Testify at a public hearing. Hopefully it never comes to this, but if the city does this and the MLC agree on a contract with either Aetna or Emblem for Medicare Advantage, there has to be under, the city's administrative law, there has to be a hearing before the contract goes into effect. And if that does happen, I mean, we'll certainly tell you about it. And I assume that the hearing will be virtual, and we need hundreds and hundreds of people to raise their voices and testify. Raise the issue with current and prospective city officials. Talk to your council people. Send a letter to the controller, to the mayor, to the public advocate. And of course, there are a whole host of people running for office in the Democratic primary late June, running for city council seats, running for citywide office. They need to hear about this. Write a letter to the editor. I don't know if you're necessary, but I mean, try to get a letter into the Times, the Daily News, Gotham Gazette, the Gothamist. And one place I would suggest that you're right is the chief. Maybe a lot of people have never heard of the chief leader. It's a small newspaper, but the point is that it's read by city officials. It's read by labor leaders, and they publish letters. Sometimes they publish letters ad nauseum. It just goes on for pages and pages. But the more letters to the chief leader, the better. And there's information in this document in terms of how you can get your letter to the chief leader. And there's a sample letter. And Doris Hart, who wrote a sample letter, maybe you want to add to what we have down here. I mean, Doris. I don't know if we have Doris on or if Doris is unmuted.
I'm on.
You're on.
Great.
Go for it.
I just want to say that we have almost 200 people here today. If we could each make a copy of this letter and send it, keep sending it, put it on social media, send it to the Times, the Daily News, your local council person, anybody that you think has influence, send it to the mayor. I don't care, send it to him. It's very, very important that we get our letters out. You can do it via email, you can do it via snail mail, but if everybody would send letters, it would put pressure. And that's what we need to do. We need to put pressure on the Municipal Labor Committee and the mayor so that things do change, and even city council. They must, if we pressure people, they will speak up for us. We just can't sit back, folks. We've got to send those letters out. That's it.
And it says as the final paragraph, you could briefly include your personal medical concerns. It's very important if you write one of these letters that it be in your own voice. I mean, terrific. We've got a model letter here, but it's even more powerful if it's in your voice. And if you can talk about your particular medical concerns. Samantha, if you could end this share screen. And I want to open this up to people. As I say, the focus is on what we can do. As I say, today, I don't think that we can answer questions about, what's going to happen if this proposal goes into effect, how it will impact upon you. We can't answer those questions until we actually know it's going to happen, and we're trying to stop this, and if it does, we'll set up a special meeting. But I want to hear from people just in terms of what you think in terms of possible action. So I'm going to open it up, and don't see any hands up at this point.
Jim had his hand up earlier. Jim, do you not have a question now or comment?
Well, it was just to stress that the easiest place to get a letter into a paper is a community newspaper, and the politicians all read those. So if you have one or more community newspapers, that's the place to go.
So Virginia, Michigan, Elam, you're on. Virginia, are you unmuted?
Can you hear me?
Hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to comment a little reality check. One of our people that's working at Cuny currently is undergoing chemotherapy and radiation therapy for breast cancer. Each chemo session costs $20,000 plus $6,000 for the Neulasta that she receives after the chemo, and a cost of over 8 sessions, that's $208,000. Memorial Sloan Kettering does not accept Medicare Advantage plans. Neither do a lot of other hospitals and groups. This is a disaster. If we get stuck with this, and we will be stuck with it, I just feel that this whole thing has a lot of perfidy involved in it and hubris from DC 37 president, et cetera. And we have to mobilize, because I don't know any professor or anybody working within the CUNY system that can afford $208,000 for chemotherapy. And that does not include the radiation therapy and all the secondary effects of chemo and radiation therapy. It's ridiculous to go with Medicare Advantage.
Well said. And of course, we've got to mobilize your anger and everybody's anger. We have a tremendous lot at stake in this. Dave Cuddlechuck?
I'm sorry?
I'm calling on Dave Cuddlechuck.
Okay, yes. Folks, first, don't ignore the importance of talking to friends who are municipal and retirees from other unions. A lot of us have half a dozen or 3 or 4 friends. Make sure that you contact them as individuals, because many of the people in other unions don't even know about what's happening. So that's a very important thing. And I'd like to add, last night through Nancy Romer, I was asked to speak at a UFT retirees, not an official meeting, but a meeting of a group of them. They said that they were planning to have 35 people come, and they were going to talk about Medicare and Medicare Advantage. 300 people showed up. They had to switch over to a seminar, and people were ready to mobilize, and they're as upset as we are. So spreading the word individually, as well as writing the letters, as well as signing the petition, is very important.
And UFT is very important. UFT has 70,000 retirees. I think that's the correct figure approximately. We have 3,000 in our chapter, and maybe another couple of thousand who are not members. So Anne, go ahead, you're on.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I know we always talk about how this is an issue for our entire union, retirees in training as well as retirees. As you said, Bill, overwhelming outrage and support from our delegate assembly a few weeks back. And so this is not just our issue. This is our PSC leadership's issue. And I know that our leaders, our officers, our executive council, our chapter chairs are overworked ad infinitum, and there are so many issues, but I would like to know if we know, I don't know if James is still on or somebody from the officers or the EC, what efforts, organizing efforts can we push our central union to do? Because we talk about going to the press, you know, we can do that as best we can, but we have a communications shop at the PSC. I mean, we have a communications director who is expert at getting to the press. I really don't know what's happening at that level. And I don't think much is going to happen at that level unless we push for it. So I would like to put on the table, you know, really working toward getting our full union involved in this. This is a real crisis, and this can come down on us within days or weeks. I mean, nobody knows, which adds to our panic and our stress and anger. So I would like to put that out there.
Good point, Ann.
Bill, before we go on, I just want to say I have Lisa, but then also Yafa, who couldn't raise her hand in the queue. So I see Lisa, Yafa, then John, and I guess Evie after that.
And Michael Frank.
And then Mike Frank. I'm sorry, before Evie. Yeah, Mike before Evie. Yeah.
So Lisa, you're on.
Okay, I have 2 points. Call New York 1. I got through. To wrote a letter to Courtney Gross. 1 asked for Eric Lewis, Courtney Gross, Dean Meminger. Okay, I think, you know, New York 1, if you bug them, I think that, you know, there's a chance. Okay, number 2, I heard, and of course, you know, it's one of those I heard things, that there's good, if you want to keep the Medicare, then you would pick up the GHI senior for like $100. My question is, if that's an option, should it's like too much for people. Like 25 would be reasonable. Paying $2 now, that's ridiculous. Like 20, 25. I mean, don't these people, I mean, I don't understand. This is like simple. Make, you know, okay, so I'll pay $20 a month. Big deal. Okay, so that's an idea.
No.
Except we know, I mean, people want to make money off of this. We know that. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
all right.
I don't think they're considering that as an option.
Yeah.
Let me just.
But that's a very reasonable, you know, idea. Anyway.
Right. And Lisa's been very active in terms of pushing New York 1, as she said, calling into the Brian Lair show, and others have to do that too. John Hyland?
Unmute, John.
John, you're muted.
Still muted.
Okay, I just want to make a suggestion about Brian Lair's show. My sense is that he gets a fair amount of listeners. U of T person was on last week with the mayor's piece on Friday at 11 o'clock. Blasio basically blew him off, blew her off. Everything's going to be fine. We love the retirees and so forth. I think Lara, it would be good if Lara would do a segment on this in which you would have speakers, for example, like Len Rodberg or people very knowledgeable about this. And what I'm suggesting is that we call or email Lara all the time between now and you know all this time to do a segment on this, not just a call in, you know, 2 minutes with Blasio. So it's just a suggestion.
Good suggestion. And I mean, I'll also talk to Fran Clark, the communications director, to get advice in terms of how we get on the Brian Lehrer show. Not so easily done, but of course, the only way we can do it is really by persistence, trying and trying again. Let me look.
Yafa, how about Yafa?
Yafa, go ahead.
Yafa, you're on.
I want to communicate the sense of alarm about Medicare Advantage.
Can you speak a little louder?
Thank you. I want to communicate the sense of alarm that I have when I heard about Medicare Advantage, and do everything you can to keep it. But I'm concerned because as large as our union is, it is a small fraction of the employee of this great city of New York. They take us for fools when they think they will get away selling us advantage. Once they get it, they'll never go back. Not of today. I have a request. My request is to Barbara Owen. She is top-notch about writing letters. I never read such a sample letter that she wrote about McKinsey. Please, Barbara, I heard you last time I listened and you said the contract is not signed. That's what I heard you say. Thank you. Please write for us a letter and tell us clearly who should we write to, what shall we write to, as clear as possible, as effective as possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Yafa. Mike Frank?
You're muted, Mike.
Okay. In terms of outreach to our in-service members, if it hasn't already been done, Bill, can we send the link to our newsletter, which has a lot of information about this, to the chapter chairs and ask them to forward it to the members of their chapters?
Good suggestion. Yes, consider it done. I mean, I'll do it after this meeting.
Thank you.
Evelyn, Evie Rich?
Yes, I'm ready. First, I want to commend our chapter, Retirees, for the leadership that you have shown in highlighting the challenge we face as retirees in this move to transfer us to Medicare Advantage. Had we not stood up, they probably would have done it already. But the work that we have to do lies ahead. So first off, let's remember that the powerful unions in the MLC support this move to Medicare Advantage. I'm talking about DC 37 specifically and the UFT. As a matter of fact, the UFT tacitly has warned its members that if you don't support this, your pension may well be in jeopardy. So we should follow Dave Kotelchuk's suggestion that should we have friends in DC 37 and the UFT, we need to reach out to them immediately. And we need to encourage them to support their friends in opposition to this move. The second thing we need to do is to reach out to the candidates for mayor, not only the city council, but also the highest offices. Some of us are close to these candidates, and we need to tell them that the time has come for them to step forward if in any way they want to attract the votes of the 250,000 retirees who oppose this move. The next thing we need to do, from my perspective, is to highlight the problems we will face should this move to Medicare Advantage occur. There is no evidence whatsoever that a Medicare Advantage will support and strengthen health care for retirees. As a matter of fact, the evidence shows just the opposite. And we need to be vocal and articulate in our letters indicating opposition. And finally, and I think this is important, the leaders of the MLC and the Office of Labor Relations have both indicated tacit support for this move. Read the Chief, read Gothamist, read any of these local newspapers, and you will see where their response is to explain why the move is going to benefit New York City. We must argue effectively that this move will not help the fiscal crisis in which this city finds itself. And until the city explores other options, including self-insurance, we will continue to be fiscally, morally in big trouble.
Yes, thanks, Evie. And I always appreciate Evie's fire, and I appreciate the fire of everybody, you know, on this call today. Not just simply anger for the sake of anger, but anger that we're harnessing to mobilize. Let me just say that, as others have pointed out, there's a group in the UFT that is certainly organized against this move. And let me also point out that the chair of the DC 37 retirees group is super militant on this issue in terms of opposing what DC 37 is doing and what the rest of the MLC is doing. Nancy Romer. Oh, by the way, I just put again, you know, the link to the suggested actions. And if you click on that link, you'll see that in those suggested actions, there's a link to two other pages on the website. One, you can, if you're ready to participate in a demonstration, you know, go to that link and sign up. And two, you know, just referring back to what Evie and others have said in terms of our stories about Medicare Advantage, there's a link to another web form where we're asking you to give us information. One, will your Medicare providers accept Medicare Advantage? Tell us. And two, stories about Medicare Advantage. We need to hear them. We need to collate this information, and we need to get it out. So with that said, Nancy Romer, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, Evie, thank you. Great. Not just fire, but focus. So thank you. And Bill, thank you for, you know, raising this and shepherding this through. So I agree with Evie. I think what we really need to have is a very focused strategy conversation with Fran Clark. I think that Bill and others who have been working on the PSC Retirees webpage have done a masterful job, but there's a lot of stuff there. I think, you know, we need to have a strategy about what we're presenting on the retirees page, very brief talking points at the top, links to the articles that have been written already and published, something very focused, and then all the other things. But in terms of a strategy, I think we need to have, you know, a strategy that deals with the Brian Lehrer Show, with New York, reaching out to New York One, reaching out to other journals, and also providing us with Facebook posts, with Twitter posts that are already canned, already written up, so that we can advance this. I think for most people, but particularly for retirees, to come into a lot of information that they have to wade through to figure out how they can create a Twitter feed or a Facebook. It's too much. It's too much. So I would like to suggest that we have a small group of people from our retiree chapter meet with Fran Clark. Look, this was passed by the Delegate Assembly, right? You know, to put a pause on this, to have a moratorium until there's further information. So I think we should do that. That's one concrete proposal, as well as making the, you know, what we can do page just a little bit easier to follow. And also for us to be able to have one email in which all of these points, what we're concerned about losing, or, you know, what we're fearful about in terms of Medicare Advantage, plus the links to the articles that have been put out, so that we can take that to our friends in other unions and simply send it out. Right now, there's a lot of, when I'm trying to do this, I'm assembling a lot of information and missing things, I'm sure. One other thing I want to suggest is that, and I know that Bill, you're trying to get this information from people, asking people to tell their stories. But we know now that Sloan Kettering won't take Medicare Advantage. We heard from Stuart Shar that some of the NYU Langone doctors won't take it. And I'd like to know about Mount Sinai. Those are the 3 top hospitals. If they won't take our Medicare Advantage for, you know, serious problems that older folks will have, and younger folks too, but mostly, then we should be saying that these are our concerns, that our Medicare Advantage will not be taken at the 3 major hospitals in New York City. It's one of the reasons that people stay in New York City is so that we do have access to these top hospitals. So you know, again, I'd like to suggest that we meet with Fran Clark, that he help us navigate a real strategy, so that we're not just doing, you know, it's sort of as we get an opportunity, but we create the opportunities.
I'm gonna reach out to Fran Clark, set up a meeting, and I think you should be included in that meeting,
I'm
Nancy.
happy to do it.
And Nancy, of course, is always there.
And just elected to be one of our reps.
Oh yeah, what did I get myself into?
Yes, in this recent PSC election, there were 2 retiree representatives elected to the executive committee of the PSC, Marva Lilly and Nancy Romer, and they'll both be strong voices on that new EC.
I have Sandra.
Sandra left off?
Yes, I'm here.
Good, Sandra, go ahead.
Okay, so my concern is when this meeting is over, which is very helpful and really quite informative, how are we going to keep in touch with one another, right? I mean, because I think a lot comes out through the discussions. A lot of people have I find very helpful. And so is there a discussion board, or can we create a discussion board that we all have access to, so we can pass information, so we can, you know, sort of collate and pull together ideas of what we want to do, so it doesn't just depend on the meeting itself. And maybe it already exists and I don't know about it, but that would be very helpful. I also want to make the same point has been made. Sloan Kettering will not take advantage. It's very scary. Nobody can sign up for that Advantage plan, not knowing what they have covered or not. It's like, you know, it's an absolute crapshoot in life. Okay, I have a question too. If we do not accept this Advantage plan, and then it works out that things, they negotiate and all of our doctors and hospitals do agree, can we then rejoin the city plan? So can you opt out of this Advantage and then rejoin it later?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, but
we don't know.
We don't know, you know,
Okay.
I mean, and that's something that we have to find out. By the way, we armed Barbara Bowen, you know, who's going to the steering committee meeting of the MLC today, with all sorts of questions that actually had been developed by Comro, including access, you know, to special hospitals like MSK, Memorial Sloan Kettering. And it's not just New York hospitals. Remember, there are thousands of municipal retirees in Florida. You know, I get emails from a retiree who actually used to be a member of our executive committee, Peter Jonas, who lives in Baltimore. And of course, he's concerned, you know, will Johns Hopkins accept Medicare Advantage. This we've got to find out. Bruce Brown, go ahead.
And the discussion
Yeah,
board,
hi,
can we
thank
get
you.
that going?
Yeah, thanks. So I think this discussion about strategy that's been going on here is really very important, and I want to express my appreciation to Bill and everybody else who's organizing these kinds of talks. But my point is a very specific one. I don't think we have enough information on the Medicare Advantage plan that's being proposed. I recall that Donna Costa mentioned that it could be a good plan. She doesn't know enough. Well, I think in order for us to write letters, we really need to know a lot more about how the Medicare Advantage plan and its Medigap provisions compare with the current standard original Medicare plus supplemental. If we don't know that, we can't write letters that complain. I remember that when I also, like John, heard the segment from Brian Lara, where the mayor blithely responded that, yes, we care about retirees and this is going to be a very good plan. But the person who called, and I have to compliment that person for sticking with it and calling, it didn't specify specific problems with the Medicare Advantage plan that we have to address. And without that kind of information, we can't really object too strenuously. We have to object in specifics, not in generalities, not like, oh, Medicare Advantage is a private company, private plan, all they care about is making money. That's not the problem. The problem is, what do we get or what do we lose when we subscribe to this Medicare Advantage plan? How do they compare? So I'll give you an example. I know that for me and for other people I've heard talking here, some people spend some time out of the country. Well, we know that Medicare doesn't cover costs out of the country, and supplemental plans don't cover what Medicare doesn't cover. So that's why I subscribed to the GHI or Emblem Health supplemental component, because they do cover out-of-country costs if you incur them. It's true that they're based on some like ancient formulary, but still they'll cover something. And I don't know whether or not the Medicare Advantage plan will do that. Very few of them do. Now, I remember that the Advantage plan may be connected with Emblem Health. Does that mean they're going to use the same rules as they do currently? We don't know. So this is just one small detail of many, many differences that could exist between these plans. And I think we really need a serious point-by-point breakdown of how these plans compare and what are the specific disadvantages. Clearly, if a provider doesn't accept insurance, that has to be a deal breaker, but I'm sure there are many, many other differences between these plans that it would help us to know in order to write critical letters.
Yeah,
so
Bruce is right. We need precise information. The problem is that we don't have precise information because the negotiating process is almost totally opaque. There's no transparency. So, I mean, that's, I think, the first thing that we've got to demand. But yes, we need much more information if we're going to speak intelligently about what's in front of us. So, Joel Mason?
Yes. Well, I'd just like to say that it's thought that perhaps the members of the city council might be helpful here. And we happen to have one member of the city council who is a CUNY, PSC CUNY retiree. Bob Holden represents a district in Queens. He was a former colleague of mine, and I'm going to get on the phone and talk to him immediately about this because I think that's a possible lever we should use.
Good point.
And I don't live in the city now, so I do feel a little bit disadvantaged. And I think members should definitely contact folks who live in the city, should definitely reach out to the city council member who represents them.
Absolutely. George Liebman?
George. George. There you go.
Hello.
Okay, we hear you loud and clear.
First of all, let me just thank everyone for the wonderful ideas and strategies we've talked about today. Some ideas have said that, well, there is no evidence that says that a Medicare Advantage program provided by a for-profit provider there's no evidence that it could provide equal to a original Medicare policy. And I don't think you need evidence. I think you can just say that there's a mathematical fact that any service that's provided by a for-profit company is definitely going to be less than what a single care, payer, not-for-profit provider would be. And the argument is very simple. It goes like this. This company is trying to make a profit. They have to minimize costs because they're capitalists, and any new strategy, if they come to New York City to propose, which would say, we're going to give you something that's as good as Medicare, that means they would have to come up with some new strategy. But if they are good capitalists, they would have already done that, right, to minimize the costs to provide their service. So unless they stop making money, they're not going to have anything that's as good as Medicare. And the conclusion that I get from this is that if New York City adopts a Medicare Advantage program, they're essentially taking value away from us. That's all. Yeah. This is just a simple mathematical argument. It's like saying 2 and 2 is 5. Right. If you say that Medicare Advantages are just as good as Medicare. With all due respect to Donna Costa.
Right. I mean, you made that mathematical argument very powerfully and in the last minute or two. Len Rodberg made it very powerfully at our April 5th meeting when basically he talked about the same kind of math.
Right.
But absolutely, yes. Well said. Renata, Breidenthal?
Oh, thanks, Bill. Actually, and now I'm just going to repeat, but I'll be brief about it, which is it just stands to reason that in privatization, their costs are our claims. So of course they want to reduce costs. It stands to reason that this will be a challenge or a disadvantage to our claims. It's the same point. I'm just making it again. Thank you for calling.
Thanks, Renata. Margaret Cortell or Marilyn Cortell. I'm sorry to mangle your name, Marilyn.
No, that's fine. Just think of Marilyn Monroe and you won't do that again. Listen, I'm a very new retiree, so it's only 2 years and I have not had any problem with the Medicare that we have now and my supplement Emblem Health. But one of the things that does concern me is that while we're on this call and I have gained a great deal of knowledge, I'm also very overwhelmed. And one of the things that I like to do is be sure of the facts before I make any of these phone calls or do any writing. Mm-hmm. And for me to just call and say, well, NYU won't accept Medicare Advantage and that's where all my doctors are, or I go to Cornell because I live 3 blocks from them, or Hospital for Special Surgery would not take Medicare. We need to really and truly know for sure that every single hospital and our doctors will or will not accept Medicare Advantage. And now I just bought a little tiny apartment in Florida and I will now have to call. Well, I did actually ask my husband's cardiologist. I did ask him and the neurologist whether they will accept Medicare Advantage, and both of them said yes. So we've got to know, there has to be somebody, and unfortunately, I know the person with the suggestion gets caught with having to do the assignment. There is no way. I'm dealing with too many personal issues at the moment, but I just want to say that if we could have someone in charge that would just be responsible for calling, well, everybody their own doctors for sure, and then really be sure that we're 100% accurate on the hospitals. It's critical that we just don't say 3 of them or 4 of them when there are so many. And I don't know how to go about doing that. If we have a secretary, I'm just too new.
Yeah, well, there's a form. I know I gave you the URL, the link for what actions that we can take. And in that document, in that document, there's a link to a web form where we're trying to gather information about Medicare Advantage and whether people's doctors or hospital providers will accept it. I mean, basically what you should be asking is, look, the city of New York may indeed put retirees on a passive PPO Medicare Advantage plan. Are you ready to accept that? And some maybe can't even answer you at this point, but let's try to get the information. I mean, we don't know for sure whether these hospitals will accept the plan, and we don't know for sure what doctors will accept the plan, but we've got to get more information. So next, Rachel Cohn. And Rachel, make sure you unmute yourself. Rachel? I don't know if, you know, on the left side at the bottom, you know, you'll see you're either muted or unmuted.
On the phone, if she, oh, okay. She might be on a phone where she might have to press star 7 or star 9. I'm not sure which.
Why don't we come back to Rachel? And Rachel, if we're not able to actually get your voice on, you can pose your question or your comments, you know, to the chat, and we will preserve the chat. I see John is next, but John has already spoken. So, I mean, and of course we want to hear from John again. But I'm going to go first to people who haven't spoken yet. So Nanette Funk, Nanette.
Yes, I want to talk to the point that we need more information before we engage in any actions. And we're in a catch-22 situation. In fact, we have to act now, because if we wait until we have absolute certainty, the kind of thing that Descartes always wanted, we will already have a fait accompli. We will be in a plan, and it'll be too late to protest. So we have to act in the face of uncertainty, where we know that it's possible that some doctors have said they will not, that some hospitals have said that we will not have access to them. We can't be certain precisely because the information has been withheld from us. And if we let that stop us, then we're playing their game, they win, and we lose. And it's not even enough. I've talked to doctors or their offices, and there are many different Advantage plans. And if you even say it's going to be an Advantage plan, that's not going to be enough to tell them what plan it is. So I assume that we have to make a decision and act without certainty.
Remember, what we're asking right now is for transparency and a moratorium. I mean, you're right, Nanette. I mean, these other issues, because we just don't know. You know, we can't make the demands because of lack of information. But what we can demand is that this process become transparent, that retirees, the 250,000 municipal labor retirees are consulted on this, and that there be a moratorium in terms of making a decision. That's, I think, something that we can demand. I'm going to go next. You know, I see Bonnie and Bob Nelson. I don't know if it's Bonnie or Bob, or you're going to speak as a team. Bonnie wrote a terrific piece in the newsletter, which hopefully folks read. And Bob Nelson, months and months ago, you know, flagged this possibility of the city moving to Medicare Advantage, and was really one of the first people to raise the alarm. So I don't know if it's Bonnie or Bob or both of you, but why don't you unmute? Ah, they're the two of them together. Okay.
Yes. Are we unmuted? Yes.
You're unmuted.
All right. I just wanted to point out that first, this is supposed to be a passive PPO Medicare Advantage plan. So they claim that any doctor who accepts Medicare can be in the network, but it's still up to the doctor or the hospital to choose
Right.
whether or not they do want to participate. Second, they can choose to participate today and change their mind next week. So asking the doctor whether they will choose to participate in this doesn't mean that they can't decide that they don't pay fast enough, so that they're going to dump it. One of the reasons that doctors like being in Medicare is they pay very quickly. Medicare Advantage plans often pay less. This one supposedly will pay the same, but it may pay slowly and may be a hassle for the doctor. So they could drop it after trying it for a while. Plus, the city's negotiating right now to pick a finalist. I believe it's going to be a 5-year contract. At the end of 5 years, they're going to put out a new bid. We can have totally different company managing it. And then, you know, everything's on the table again. So hospitals that agree to participate may change their minds. So I think that's one of the things, people asking for certainty. There is no certainty with a Medicare Advantage plan. It doesn't matter what they say today. It could change next week.
Good point. And when I was on the phone with Barbara Bowen the other day, she said that was one of the things that she was particularly concerned about, and hopefully raised it today at the MLC steering committee meeting. Why don't we go to John Hyland, and then we'll go back to Rachel Cohn if she's able to unmute and get on. So John?
Thanks. I just want to reinforce the idea that's been out a couple of times here. I mean, I think as Bruce and Marilyn pointed out, there's so much that we don't know. It's hard for us to articulate an alternative. However, I think that's the wisdom of the moratorium idea, right? We don't know, and we keep saying we don't know. There are too many forces in play here. Stop the process until we know. Open up the process so that we can know. I think that's the main function, and therefore we can write letters, we can make calls, and that's the message. We do not want to wake up some morning or open the mail someday and find out that we're in a Medicare Advantage plan. They can, you know, if you read the materials that are coming out from some of the unions that are in favor of it, or from the MLC itself, the message is a message of reassurance. This is not the old Medicare Advantage. This is a new one. It's better. It's got this. It's got that. You can keep your doctors. Then we're going to keep Medicare reimbursement Part B. All these, but we don't know that. Those are claims. Those are selling points. So I think we need to stop the process until it's a different process in which the people who are affected by it, who are us, participate in it.
Yeah, and that's, let me just repeat that. As John says, we want to stop the process. That's what the petition is about, you know, and it's important you sign it if you haven't signed it already, and it's important that you share it and get other people to sign it. If there is a demonstration at City Hall, it'll be to stop the process. I think that's all that we can push for right now, because the process is not transparent. We just don't have the information. Anyway, I mean, I just want to thank, I mean, I don't see any other hands up. I just
try again for Rachel Cohn, because I think she was in and out of the meeting. I just admitted her again.
Oh, okay. So
Rachel, if you are in.
Rachel, did you have a comment or question? Unmute yourself and you're on.
Yes, hi. I'm actually calling on behalf of my wife, Rachel Cohn. Just a few quick comments. The first thing is tomorrow, you know, Michael Mogru's meeting, as you probably all know, is a telephone format, which means that he is going to end up probably pre-screening questions and selecting only those who he wants, whose answers are going to suit his agenda. So just be aware of that. If he did a Zoom, it would be obvious if he closed the chat or any other visibility function, but through a telephone format, it's not going to be very democratic. The second thing I want to say is, even if we were to play devil's advocate and
have a system where Medicaid Advantage literally gave us the world and gave us a superior bunch of services, understand that a private company can then start to whittle that away over time in the name of profit, and they call the shots. And their lobbying efforts with our government officials is very, very strong. So there is nothing good about this. It's really a red flag. And Medicare, since its inception, was meant to be basically a universal healthcare system for 65 plus. And it's been, this is going to change the DNA of the program, just to be aware of that. Also, one last point, from our research, and I absolutely do not intend to spread misinformation, but it has been said in research that when Medicare Advantage finds that the risk pool costs more money in a certain illness, they then go back to the government and say, we need more money for these people, and the government gives them more money. But that money has to come from somewhere, and that would come from conventional Medicare. So as this set as a precedent, it would siphon off money from the public funds into the private funds. And we know how that always goes. Just ask the people who are proponents of charter schools. So this is something that, like I'm hearing with so many other people, we must remain militant about and fighting, because it's not just for city employees. It sets a precedent for all of New York State, and then it just spreads to the country.
Will they provide the email address
And,
so we can
and
link up?
will you provide an email address so that we can link up with other unions and communicate with other people in other New York State and city unions?
An email address? I'm not quite clear what you're asking here.
You talked about an
They
email
mentioned an
address.
email address before.
An
Here, my
email
wife will
address-
ask the question.
No, hi. I'm just asking because I know that you had mentioned an email address before. It was brought up before. I don't know if there actually is one.
I mean, there is an email address, which I respond to, which is retirees@pscmail.org. But I try to answer each query as I get it, but I'm absolutely overwhelmed.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. I just thought that
But if you need to get in contact, it's retirees@pscmail.org. And let me just underscore, what your husband said. By the way, he referred to Michael Mulgrew. He's the president of the United Federation of Teachers. And of course, as I mentioned, the UFT has tens of thousands more retirees than the PSC does, I think up to 70,000, including just tens of thousands, I think, in the state of Florida alone. But yes, the Medicare Advantage legislation, from 2003 to the present, I mean, it was instituted, I believe, under the Bush Jr. administration, has constantly siphoned money off from Medicare itself. I think that's an important point. I see one other hand up, Myra Halbin, and then I think we're going to call an end to this meeting. But Myra, go ahead. Myra, I see you, but I don't hear you.
Okay, you can. Just very quickly, I had lunch with a friend the other day who's retired, and her husband was not with her, but he's a retired doctor from New York City. And when I was stressing out about this Medicare Advantage, she said they were in Medicare Advantage and it was awful, but she didn't know what it was awful about. So I contacted her husband afterwards with an email, and he immediately answered my questions about this very simply. And he, do you have Medicare Advantage? What are the problems? And he said, we had it some years ago as an HMO plan, but switched back to traditional Medicare because 1, we got a wider choice of physicians. 2, did not require prior approval from the HMO for referrals and many procedures. Doctors prefer traditional Medicare too, because it involves less paperwork for the doctors. And the last thing was, the medical advantage system represents a heavy government subsidy to private insurance companies and undermines Medicare for all, in my view.
Which was the point that the last speaker made also.
Yeah, so that was just from a retired doctor friend, and I thought that might be helpful. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Myra. So we've got a lot of good suggestions. We will certainly follow up and set up a meeting with our own communications shop, in the PSC, which is headed by Fran Clark. We'll spread the word to in-service members in our chapter. Somebody suggested that we reach out to chapter chairs, which I'll do, and ask them to circulate information about what we're facing. And best way to do that is to give them a link to our May and April newsletters. And obviously, we're going to try to sit down and talk with present PSC leadership. Barbara Bowen is going to be president for another 3 weeks and a couple of days. And of course, I don't know if James is still at this meeting, but
No, he had to go.
certainly we'll be in touch with the new president, James Davis, and the 3 other principal officers, Andrea Vasquez, Penny Lewis, and Felicia Warden. And the best way, somebody wanted to know if we could maybe set up a Google group. We'll look into that in terms of, day-to-day information, but we do put updates on the PSC webpage, which is psc-cuny.org/retirees. And I try to keep that page up to date, and there'll be new information on it. This meeting is being recorded, just as the last meeting was recorded. And once we have a recording of the meeting, we'll put a link to it on the webpage. This is not the last conversation that we're going to have about this. And I assume that we're probably going to have to set up a special meeting or two. We do have a regular meeting, scheduled next for June 14th, when Barbara Bowen will be our speaker, and she'll talk on her 21 years as PSC president. But my guess is that there's probably going to be another retiree chapter meeting before then, because we need to talk about this proposed move to Medicare Advantage. I want to thank everybody. Today was just really powerful in terms of not just the emotion and concern that you communicated, but all the good ideas, like all the smart thinking. Let's mobilize this smart thinking. Let's mobilize the anger and move ahead on this, and at least take the first step to getting some kind of transparency in this process, and into getting a moratorium, or as John Hyland very succinctly said it, stop the process. We want to stop the process. So again, thank you, everybody.
Can I just say one thing? It's
Absolutely.
Also, one of the things we do know is that if they are ready to sign this contract, they will have to have hearings. And then we should be ready to queue up and be at that hearing. And whether they have to be there for 50 hours, then we should be there to make sure that they have to hear all of our concerns and complaints and whatever. So again, there's plenty to do, and I just hope everybody is ready to act, because that's all that's going to stop this, is us being mobilized.
Absolutely. And public hearing, as well as other thing, is on that, that page that we had of possible actions, which we're going to update now that we heard more from our members today. And there are links to all this on that retirees webpage at psc-cuny.org/retirees. That's where you can go to get links to these web forms that we've set up, to these action pages that we've set up, and certainly to our newsletters, particularly the April and May newsletters, which have lots of information written by a variety of people. So again, thank you, everybody. This was really terrific. I wish I could end this meeting by saying, oh, they agreed to a moratorium, they're going to be totally transparent, and this is not going to happen for another 25 years, but I can't give you that news. Anyway, thank you again. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Bill.